Hello everybody, welcome back to more Art of War, Hell Hath No Fury. It's Sunday. It's a little bit dim in here, I hope that's okay. We're going to carry on today with chapter 5, introducing the fourth perspective that the book is written in and finding out who they are, what they're up to and what part they might play in the story. So without further ado, I'm just going to get on with it. Chapter 5. The graveyard of St. Francis Church was a peaceful place. A sanctuary where anybody would be able to find solace in their final hours of rest. Rows of plots radiated out from the grand faded brick building, a monument to the veneration of something more powerful than the beloved woman who the town had been named after. Faith was something that had never been lacking in Marytown, and the church was as needed today as it had been when it was constructed, because there were many good people here who believed in the power of prayer and the ability to be forgiven for your sins, all of your sins. Amanda Ford's father had once been a man of faith. He had once been a good man, the kind that believed in the honour of living a virtuous life and who tried to impart the same moral goodness on his daughters whenever he was able. But that was back when Amanda was a child and she thought her daddy was a real-life superhero, could do nothing wrong. She'd never seen the other side of him, never knew his darkness. Recently she learned far more than she'd ever wanted to. Why his relationship with her older sister had been fundamentally strained compared to his relationship with Amanda. Now that she knew, it was all crystal clear. Martha had never been a Ford. She was a Valentine, something other. And Amanda's father had held onto their mother's secret until it poisoned him, turned him from the righteous path that he'd always tried to walk and made him bitter, made him do something that was so awful, so sinful that it had gotten him killed by a monster that he'd invited into their home, a fate he hadn't deserved. Whatever he'd done. As all of the town's original structures, St. Francis Church was a breathtaking sight to behold, with its many spires and prominent awnings. It was a sturdy reminder of an era long past, a stone edifice that had survived the wildfires that had ravaged the town a few years into its life, save for a few notable battle scars, scorch marks branded into the brickwork of the robust square clock tower it still carried with pride. An imperfection that was a testament to either its iron will or the blessings bestowed on it by a higher power that it had been built to deify. Amanda didn't know which. Still, she respected its longevity and its determination to hold fast in the face of abject terror and tragedy. Heaven only knew it was an inspiration. Beautiful arrangements of flowers still lay strewn along the entire length of her father's familiar burial plot. A bright blanket of nature that spoke of the admiration and respect he commanded from all who'd known him as a pillar of the Marytown community. He'd been loved, respected by many more than his daughter. It shouldn't have ended this way. Not for him. Not like that. If it hadn't been for Martha finally coming back home and taking control of the mess that had been left in the wake of their tragedy, Amanda would never have known the truth about what happened to her father. It was a good thing, getting those answers, but it was also a double-edged sword. Some things you couldn't unlearn or ever take back. It was awful. The truth was so very awful, and yet Amanda couldn't feel any differently about her father. She couldn't sit here at his graveside and let his terrible end change the wonderful memories he'd given her in life. Love, the pride, the opportunities. He was her dad. That was all that mattered. Would ever matter. Still, it didn't mean that it didn't hurt, the pain of his loss. "Oh, you proud, foolish old man," she murmured, as a fresh round of tears tumbled down her cheeks, making her heart break all over again. Amanda didn't know how long she sat there, drowning in her grief, but after a while she found herself looking up, her sorrow-filled eyes drawn to the gravel path that encircled the church like a moat, guarding it against the army of the buried like it had been strategically placed there as a safeguard. Ridiculous. The souls who rested here were at peace. If they hadn't been, there was no way on earth that the very living soul whose arrival had broken through her grief would have ever stepped foot in the graveyard. He was extremely sensitive to spirit. Wiping the tears from her cheeks, Amanda tried to compose herself, so that when he eventually reached her, she didn't break into pieces like she had far too many times already. It was hard, just acting normal when everything in her life was beyond that, but she tried to be strong. She tried so hard. Some days it was tougher than others, and this was one of those days. Still, she tried to smile as Joe Walsh, her boyfriend for the better part of the past year, reached her, softly saying, "Thought I might find you here." I just wanted to stop by and see him for a minute. Standing by her side, he reached forward and calmly placed a hand on her still trembling shoulder. Physical contact wasn't always a good idea between those with perceptive abilities, especially not if there was heightened emotion or some other external stressor in the mix. But it was as good a reason as any for Amanda to pull herself together, make sure her grief didn't cause any unfortunate mishaps. Caught between the choice of not having Joe comfort her and wallowing in her misery, Amanda chose to be strong and let him be there. Dating another psychic was a weird and many-splendid thing. His voice was still soft, still kind, he assured her. I know. Amanda sighed sadly, continued to focus on trying to compose herself, but so many different thoughts tried to claim her mind. All the questions she'd already had answered for her, all the things she still wished that she could ask. In the end, it simply boiled down to one inalienable truth, one that she decided to vocalise as if she hadn't a million times already since her father had been killed. I still can't believe he's gone. Joe didn't respond verbally to that. For what could he say to her that he hadn't already said a million times before? He and her father had gotten along all right. There hadn't been any bad blood between them, and it wasn't like her father disapproved of her choice of boyfriend. Quite the opposite. But they hadn't been close. Amanda's personal life had been her own business. Only now she wished that her father had formed a bond with her boyfriend, that the two of them had formed more than a congenial passing relationship based off one of them being the potential father-in-law and the other being there to help and support Amanda with a side of herself that her dad had never truly understood, though he had tried. With her, he had tried. She wished that sorrowful things simply so she had somebody to share this with, somebody who genuinely understood what she was going through and could offer her more than pleasantries in return. Her older sister should have been that person, but while she'd certainly been the one to deliver justice on their father's behalf, it had become clear to Amanda that Martha didn't mourn his loss, and even though she was now the only real family that Amanda had left in Marytown, the two of them had simply never formed that sort of bond. In this, Amanda felt like she was bitterly alone. She had nobody, no one who understood. "Hey," spoke Joe in half-joking offence. "I'm stood right here." Amanda couldn't help but choke on a small laughing smile. Yeah, she was more than aware that her boyfriend liked to mask a lot of his feelings with humour, and she more than anybody knew that he'd never quite developed the skill of knowing when it was perhaps not so appropriate to crack a joke. But he got to her. Every single time he got her smiling again. Taking her hand up in his, still resting on her shoulder, she turned her head and gave it a reassuring kiss, but made sure to say, "Not what I meant, and you know it. But I'm glad you're standing there." She felt rather than saw him shrug behind her before he made the point of highlighting, "You still have your Aunt Esther. She's here in Blackthorn if you need to have a member of your family to talk to. Otherwise you've got me, you've got Parker, all the guys at Empire. There's also Henry White. You have your sister, even though she's... well, you know what she is. You're not alone in this." Logically, she couldn't argue with what he was saying. Every one of those people would make time for her if she asked them to. But when it came to what she was struggling with, not one of them would be able to truly empathise. Not even Martha, whose forte that apparently was. Shaking her head, Amanda said, "It isn't the same." Refusing to agree with her even though he knew she was right, Joe adeptly switched the subject, softly telling her, "It's almost time. We have to get going if you still want to. Or we can just stay here if you don't." If she were being brutally honest, Amanda didn't want to leave, but Joe had made a big concession on her behalf, scheduling a meeting for her with somebody she was hoping might be able to give her some of those still unanswered questions when his shift at Empire finished, because she'd asked him to. Because she needed to start moving forward, needed a goal, needed something to focus on. This might work, it might help her, maybe. To Joe she said, "No, I want to go, I'm ready to." Using his hand to rise to her feet, she turned one last time to her father's grave, said her goodbyes, laid a tender kiss on the tips of her fingers and then pressed them against his etched name on the headstone. To herself she nodded and reiterated, "I'm ready." Taking the arm of her boyfriend, she left the graveyard behind, passing an open-air mausoleum which had been added to the rear of the building, a beautiful memorial to the founder of Marytown and the wife that he'd named the magnificent creation after. As she glanced at the stone tombs which held the pair, Amanda found herself deeply hoping that they were at peace. Death was such an awful thing in the way that it tore those who loved each other apart. No matter the legacy left behind or the circumstances surrounding the death, people were what mattered most. People who loved and lost. Amanda didn't want to be consumed by her grief. She wanted to be able to move on and heal, but the act of healing meant that she was going to have to take a very deep, scary look into herself, so that she could understand what had happened to her father. She was going to need help from somebody who was outside of all of this. Somebody who understood her confusing sides. Joe had parked his car on the residential street opposite St. Francis, and Amanda climbed into the passenger seat, feeling nervous even though she was the one that had requested the meeting. Still, as they swiftly drove out to Marytown and into the Blackthorn Hills, she started biting her fingernails, twitching her feet so much that Joe ended up reaching across and placing his hand gently on her knee to stop her vibrating the whole freaking car like it was one of those shaking funfair rides. Somewhat embarrassing, but he left it there for the duration of the short drive, and it helped calm her down. She was still afraid of what she couldn't say, but that was not exactly unusual when you're about to head into the unknown. Even though you can logically convince your mind that it wasn't going to be a disaster, it was not knowing for certain that could make you envision a whole host of awful things that could destroy you. Not that Amanda was a fatalist. At least, she never used to be. One thing was certain, she needed to regain some control over her life and her emotions. Everything had changed, it happened so fast. A little over a month ago, she had a home with 2 loving parents who thought the world of her and who she loved deeply in return. But now they were both gone. Sure, she had Martha and her Auntie Esther who'd moved back to her old house in Blackthorn. She had Joe, and she had his wonderful co-workers at Empire, who'd done so much for her she'd never know how to repay them. She had Henry White, her boss and her mentor at the art gallery. She wasn't exactly alone, but she felt so dizzy with worry and fear and instability. It was a little wonder she was so on edge. The man she was going to meet wasn't a therapist, though he'd helped Joe get through many of his own battles. As adept as her boyfriend was at many different things, he considered himself to only be a psychic in training. Perhaps always would. Back when he'd realised he needed to gain some control over his impressive powers, an unfortunate turn down a dark road had left him disowned by his family, in need of serious moral and metaphysical guidance. He had found some of the stability that he'd been missing when Peter Maxwell had been kind enough to offer him a job at Empire, but it had been Sebastian Sampson that had truly made the difference, provided him with a lifeline, a human connection who understood his power. If it hadn't been for Sebastian's guidance, Amanda was almost sure that Joseph Walsh would never have been the kind of guy that she would have been the kind of guy that she would have given a very wide berth to. As things went, he hadn't exactly endeared himself to her when they first met, but with a keen amount of persistence he'd shown her that he had a softer, sweeter, and downright romantic side, and he won her over. She'd given him a shot, let him in, and had loved him ever since. This meeting had been a long time coming. Sebastian Sampson was like family to Joe, and he'd been rather protective of his bond with the old man, but he'd been wanting Amanda to meet his adept for a while. He wanted to introduce Sebastian to the other most important person in my life, since he decided to return her love. For the two of them to meet, to bond. There was no real pressure. This was informal, a sort of meeting of Joe's parental figure, Amanda supposed, but she was dreading it nonetheless. And it wasn't simply from the healthy kind of nerves, it was the other kind, the kind that drove her crazy. The adept lived in an affluent, sparsely populated area within the Blackthorn Hills. Spacious homes dotted the tree lines like decorative baubles on a Christmas tree. For all his wealth, and their family lived rather comfortably, Amanda's father had never been tempted to buy a big house in the hills. He'd loved Marytown too much to leave it, relished being right there in the heart of the community that he revered, surrounded by things and the people that he loved dear. He would never have relocated his family, ever. Although she knew of at least one other person that lived in the exclusive area, Amanda had to agree with her dad. The hills, while beautiful, felt like a very isolating place to choose to build a home. And not simply because of what she'd been told about what hid amongst the trees and used them for cover while they ensured that they were the only ones who could bring light back to the town that she lived in were forced to sit on the sidelines. Up until recently, of course. The hills were now relatively safe, free from the many monsters that had previously populated them. Amanda hoped so, for the security of those who lived amongst them, if not for dignity's sake. Scary to think what might be lurking on your own doorstep. Whatever Amanda was imagining Sebastian Sampson to be like, the reality was far from any wild, childlike conceptions. Easily in his late 60s, the man was short, very thin, with a head of receding black hair, a very wrinkled forehead, and a face that looked starkly bemused. He opened the door to his impressively lavish home, dressed casually in a baggy royal crewneck sweater, tan corduroy trousers, and white trainers on his feet. He looked like a normal elderly gentleman with normal clothes, a normal, if very nice home, and absolutely no telltale energy signatures to expose him as being not only a metaphysical master of the highest order, but a renowned alchemist and a deeply insightful philosopher of many arts. It was an extremely cunning disguise, one Amanda was certain she would have easily fallen for had she not already heard so much about him. Her initial reaction must have amused Sebastian, as he had taken her hand, shaken the life out of it, kissed her on both cheeks. Then he'd heartily laughed and jested. Perhaps you envisioned a tall man with a white bushy beard, long robes and a ceremonial staff, Miss Ford. I'm sorry this poor excuse of a wizard doesn't live up to his legend. She was instantly mortified, stammering out an apology in panic, saying things like, No, that's not what I meant. I mean, I didn't mean to. Oh. Relax, Miss Ford, he smiled, deep crinkles dimpling in his cheeks. Do not worry, I am not offended. You should see what I wear for church. As he wandered off into the house, chuckling to himself, Jo slunk an arm around her shoulders and softly let her know that she was doing great, and that Sebastian didn't even go to church, which left Amanda wondering what on earth she'd gone and gotten herself into. The very welcoming host, it appeared, had fixed up a lunchtime spread to greet them, hurrying them along with what appeared to be a cosy yet well-lit dining room to the rear of the house. The three of them sat around a wide circular table that had been heavily adorned with pots of steaming hot, freshly brewed tea, several plates of sandwiches and miniature cream cakes, none of which Amanda had the stomach for. She would have felt rude for not nibbling on the odd morsel, however, so she made herself up a dish that went mostly untouched, even though she'd kindly been invited to dig in. Jo, on the other hand, was like a man on a mission, utterly devouring his fair share of sarnies and treats as his adept watched on fondly whilst he ate, like a grandparent who didn't get to spoil their favoured child as often as they might wish. Pride radiated from his crinkly hazel eyes, and Amanda could almost hear him thinking stuff like, a growing boy needs his food. Of course she was projecting wildly. She hadn't dared drop her psychic defences enough to read Sebastian Sampson's mind. Jo had told her enough about his adept for her to be cautious, if no longer desperately afraid of his potential. Still it came as a jolting surprise when, from out of nowhere, he bluntly asked, You consider yourself to be telepathic, Miss Ford? Yes, she nodded uncertainly, her hands falling into her lap as she laid the sandwich that she'd been nibbling back down on her plate, where they then began to twist about nervously. I suppose I've never really thought to label myself like that, but I can read other people's minds, so I guess yes. He smiled softly. Are you asking or telling me? She hesitated. Yes, I consider myself to be telepathic. But of course, why would you label yourself? He responded, gleeful with the answer for reasons she couldn't possibly begin to understand. Far too many people like to pigeonhole themselves into all sorts of little boxes these days. Nicknames, labels, pah! He wafted the notion away with a mottled hand. I've never been so fond of such things. Too boring, too restrictive. Humans as an intelligent species have given a lot of time, a lot of thought to the phenomenon of psychic ability, but there's still much mystery surrounding it. Mystery and ignorance. No, Miss Ford, you're quite right not to label what you can do by somebody else's standard. He laughed as if they'd shared an amusing private joke. If they had their way, they might as well brand us with iron and call us cattle. Amanda wasn't extremely sure who they were in his statement, but she said nothing, hoped that the silence didn't grow too awkward as it passed. She needn't have. Sebastian Sampson seemed to like to talk and could more than happily fill a gap in the conversation. He reverted to his first question, stating, I'm interested in your abilities, Miss Ford, but I'm not here to make you feel uncomfortable. I often get ahead of myself. Mouth stuffed full of food, Jo sarcastically commented. No, really? Yes, really, Sebastian responded. You, mind your manners. Amanda found herself smiling. She couldn't help herself. It's all right. Quite, Sebastian replied, though he narrowed his eyes at Jo in a way that simply dared the young man to challenge him further. I wanted to meet with you like this because you've become important to Joseph. He talks about you so often, I feel like I already know you. If there are topics that you do not wish for us to discuss, then please let me know in advance so I don't offend you. Not when things are going so well. While she didn't necessarily feel comfortable, Amanda knew that part of the reason she'd agreed to meet her boyfriend's friend and mentor was to see if she could understand her metaphysical gifts a bit better. In the hope that she might feel like she was in control of one part of her life, then everything else might sit up, take notice, get its act together. Attempting to graciously smile, she reassured, I don't mind talking. Sensing her remaining discomfort, Joe mindfully stopped shoveling food into his mouth, reached over and took one of her hands out of her lap and placed it over his own. Running his thumb lightly over her little finger, he gave her a small, almost imperceptible wink of reassurance, and she allowed herself to relax, to feel safe, because she was safe here, wasn't she? Sebastian noticed all of this, of course, gazing between the two of them as if their relationship pleased him immensely. He said, "Forgive me for my earlier rambling, Miss Ford. The world is not truly as full of naysayers and bigots as I may have implied. Not more, at least. The media adores psychics now, do they not? We have televised seances and paranormal investigations featuring celebrity mediums who have a cult following of millions. Still, I can understand why it might feel rather taboo to talk about. It's not easy to be in a world where other people fear you, simply for being able to do things that they cannot. But we're all of a like mind here, aren't we?" Favouring honesty, Amanda answered, "I don't know. I mean, I'm fairly confident about what Joe thinks of most things. We talk about, well, everything, really. But I can't possibly discern what you think." "And why is that?" "Because we don't know each other." Hedging, he urged. "Is that the only reason?" "No. You're also shielding too hard for me to have read your mind." A bushy eyebrow raised, intrigued. "Have you tried, Miss Ford?" "No," Amanda quickly answered, again immediately worrying that she'd said the wrong thing. Her gut started doing backflips. "Of course not." "Why ever not?" She glanced briefly at Joe before answering, "It would be rude." "Quite," the adept nodded in acknowledgement of the respect that had been shown to him, and then carried on as if he wasn't bothered by her candour in the slightest. "Non-mystical individuals fear the sort of gifts that you and Joseph possess, because they worried about how it might be used against them. Little do they know it's a double-edged sword. You understand this, of course." I've lost my place. Though she wasn't sure if it was a question, Amanda answered yes. It was, after all, human nature to fear what you do not fully understand, but sadly most normal people would never understand the toll it could take on being inherently viewed as other, and thus the distrust remained. "I've witnessed many talented souls suffer at the whims of their untamed power," Sebastian said. His gaze lingered on Joe in a way that could only be described as deliberate, if a little bit forlorn. But of course he knew all of the young man's history, had been there to help him come to terms with it and move forward. It's extremely tragic when balance cannot be found. Amanda agreed. She'd been very fortunate, supported through the floundering stages of her psychic development by her wonderful loving parents, and then later by her equally wonderful boyfriend. She had been lucky. Many young psychics were not. Over the years since they met, Joseph Walter had been the guide that she hadn't known she'd needed, pointing her in the right direction and encouraging her not to feel what lingered underneath her surface. He'd built his teachings on solid foundations that she'd already developed, yes. Her parents had not been psychic themselves, though. They learned many valuable lessons from the harrowing experiences of their first daughter, which had seemingly been much worse than it had ever been for Amanda. But they simply didn't know her in the way that Joe did, in the way that anybody else did, or ever likely could. Perhaps with the exception of Sebastian Sampson, given the intense way that he stared at her. Able to follow her unspoken lines of thoughts, he pondered, "You do not come from a psychic family." "No, and yes," she replied. "Neither of my parents developed any psychic abilities themselves, but my mother is wildly perceptive. We believe that my gifts are inherited from her side of the family tree rather than my father's." "Curious," Sebastian pressed. "We?" "My sister and I," Amanda swallowed down the sudden rush of undealt emotions that threatened to rise within her, simply from thinking about her relationship with Martha, of all that she'd learned. "We don't have the same biological father. She was lucky, or unlucky as she might like to say, to have gotten something from both sides of her genetic tree, but with me, we could never trace any hint of mysticism from my father's side. He was a null, in every sense of the word, until he died." "I see," the adept replied sympathetically. Amanda got the feeling that he truly did, and found herself hoping that she hadn't unwittingly told him any secrets about Martha that it wasn't her place to tell. It was hard not to allow herself to think about what she'd learned of her sister's true heritage. It still felt so unreal, impossible. "So it's fair to say that you believe your abilities are predisposed, genetic, Miss Ford?" Sebastian asked. "That you inherited them from your mother?" Amanda caught herself frowning. What else could it be? Tenting his index fingers up into a spire atop his folded hands, Sebastian contemplatively brought them to his lips as he spoke. There is a generally accepted theory that every human is capable of displaying psychic talent to some extent. The potential lies within all of us, but only a select few can trigger their development into something that they can utilise, unlock what they have inside of them. Not too long ago, I read a really interesting study that likened it to creative aptitude. Some people are naturally gifted musicians, for instance. Others have an artistic flair, rather like yourself, Miss Ford. He paused again deliberately, smiled, as if he approved. Continuing, he rolled his eyes and said, others sadly cannot carry a tune in a bucket with a lid on it, or draw something as simple as a stick man. But most people can at least doodle or hum a tune that they found catchy. It's somehow gotten itself stuck in the mind. On a very basic level, the potential for any ability is there. Some people are just more inclined to develop it. So you think that all people could potentially become psychic? Sebastian shook his head firmly. No. But you just said... She glanced at Joe, confused. He simply chuckled. I'm a gatherer of opinions, Miss Ford, Sebastian answered, and for a moment Amanda thought that he might have been deliberately being cautious, sitting on the fence while stirring the pot. It transpired he was not. He meant exactly what he said. Knowledge is my passion, he confessed. If you need me to have a solid view on the matter, I should very much like to say that I think of these things as fluid. While I might find myself inclined to agree with the study that I've read on any given day, I always find myself swayed to a more excited or factual article several days later. I am, you might say, willing to learn. You are open-minded. To be truly knowledgeable means to be able to constantly adapt to our ever-changing world, a fact that so many scholars fail to remember. He smiled. This time it was self-depreciating, as if he seemed to apply his own strange sense of humour to himself as much as others. Sebastian Sampson might have taken his interest in the world seriously, but not himself. He had a strange yet warm sense of humour. It was rather humbling and wholly charming. Joe's told me that you're a learned man, Amanda complimented him regardless. It's impressive you still find so much in the world to captivate you, that you can still enjoy studying and being able to adapt. Even an old dog like me can learn a new trick so often. Smiling, she asserted. I didn't say anything about your age. I noticed that. He nodded gallantly. But it is the truth. There's no point in denying it, is there? His face grew a little more solemn. I admit I fear the direction in which this world is headed, and I find myself wondering what should come next, how the knowledge I've accumulated over the years might be affected by that change. It'd be a shame for it to go to waste after I'm gone. His attention fell directly on his young disciple, leaving no illusion as to who he'd elected to share his vast knowledge with. It was again as like a grandparent, musing over what they were going to bequeath their favoured descendant when that time came around. Only what Sebastian seemingly desired to pass on was a trove of treasure more valuable than trinkets, and as far as Amanda knew, the adept was in good physical health. From next to her, Joe confidently assured him, it won't. In a way that could have meant anything, Sebastian simply shrugged. If Amanda expected Joe to look disappointed by the lack of response, she got a surprise when she glanced at him. For the first time since they arrived, she truly took a look at the way her boyfriend gazed at the other man in return. The acknowledgement in his chocolate button eyes was born from something a lot more than their relationship suggested. Sebastian Sampson was a fountain of metaphysical power and knowledge, an example that proved how somebody like him could become marvellous, if they were disciplined enough to allow themselves to learn from his teaching, and humble enough to stow their ego, allow their best self to emerge from his guidance. To say that Joe had initially struggled to accept his otherworldly abilities would be an understatement. Amanda knew this better than most. She'd been told the intimate details of the worst times of his life and the struggles that he'd been brave enough to overcome. Once he accepted who he was, he'd been taught some self-control, dedication, and the passion to push himself further. Amanda looked at her boyfriend at that moment, and she saw exactly how far he'd come, from the vulnerable young man he had permitted her to see when they'd finally grown close, but also how far along the path he still had to travel, where he wanted to end up. Sitting opposite the psychic adept who guided his way, she realised that she suddenly wanted him to never let go of her hand. Not simply because she loved him, or because he'd become such a special and important part of her life that she couldn't bear to even imagine him not being there by her side, but because she wanted to walk that path too. She wanted to be by his side as he became worthy of inheriting all the treasures that Sebastian Sampson wanted to give him. She wanted to be able to share that knowledgeable trove. She wanted to be strong, focused, humble, worthy, just like Joe. She wanted what he had been offered many years before, and she wanted to experience it all with him by her side. As if he explicitly knew this, her boyfriend brought the hand that he'd been holding in his lap, lifted it up to his mouth and placed one fully heartfelt kiss upon the back of it. He momentarily sealed his eyes, and she heard his voice in her head, letting her know that was all he had ever wanted. Someone by his side, someone who loved and accepted him implicitly, and Amanda had become that person. She was now a big part of his plan. He wanted her to be in his life, his future. He wanted her to take the journey with him. He'd chosen to share everything that he'd inherit with her, and Amanda found herself utterly enthralled by the prospect. If Sebastian Sampson had the knowledge to share with the people he deemed worthy, she might wish to learn it, wish to be taught, wish to be guided. However, she knew that for her journey to begin, However, she knew that for her to begin the journey that lay so tantalisingly out in front of her, she needed to face down the obstacles that were laying in her way, because her path was right there, stretched out ahead of her. But it had seen hardship and as such was marred by ruins, blocked by debris. If she were to do this, really do this, she needed to make a fresh start, fixing what had recently broken inside of her. She needed to start learning how to be the girl that she was before her life fell apart. A girl who knew exactly who she was, who had support, who had love, who wasn't afraid to close her eyes and who didn't fear what came next. She needed help, desperately. Almost beseechingly, she turned her face and gazed across the treat-laden table at Sebastian Sampson and asked, "How do I begin?" The adept smiled, a kindly, humble, psychic master grandfather, who reached out across the table and took hold of her free hand. He proudly decreed, "You already have." Okay, so that was chapter 5. I enjoyed reading that. It was good today. So fourth perspective is Amanda. Is Martha's little sister, and coming into it, she's not in a great place. She's struggling to come to terms a lot with her father's death and what they found out, and she's still grieving a lot, and she wants to understand her abilities and her part in it, because I think that was something that, although Martha swept in and killed the demon and righted the wrongs, so to speak, there were still parts of what happened on Amanda's side of it that weren't addressed or necessarily fixed or looked at, and she's struggling and wants to understand her part in things and her place in the world. So maybe, possibly, Walsh's kindly psychic grandfather type figure will help her to do that, but we will see. So when we come back, the story will be moving forward. There is quite a bit. We pretty much delve straight into the action in this book, and I'm really looking forward to reading to you what comes next and how things unfold. So yes, thank you very much for coming and watching and listening and all of that. I hope that everybody is taking care of themselves, taking care of their loved ones. I know it's a very difficult time at the moment, and reading through particularly Amanda's story at the moment I think is going to be a bit tricky to me, because there is things that have happened close to my family which are sad and having to work through. So yeah, I hope that everybody is finding comfort and distraction and everything in the things that they can do. Love your families. It's tough and it's still going on. I'm not sure when all of this is going to come to an end, but I am going to be here reading these books. So thank you as always for joining me. Hope you have a good day. Hope you've had a great weekend, and I will see you soon.